EA is in for a rude awakening. They're a company that's always been synonymous with greed, and the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about them is probably their over-aggressive monetization and all the shameless microtransactions that they add into their games. EA basically pioneered the whole idea of selling you an incomplete game with a roadmap of DLC content that a lot of people argue should have just been part of the base game in the first place. All of that just to dig a little deeper into your pockets, and they've built an entire reputation over the years as being one of the main villains of the gaming industry. But as much as we, the consumers, hate their business tactics because we're the ones who end up losing at the end of the day, well, you have to admit that they're actually very good at this whole money-making deal. They are a $30 billion company after all. So when you hear that their stock price suddenly drops almost 20% overnight, obviously some people are going to cheer a bit for that, but it really makes you wonder what the hell's been going on recently over at EA because, usually a 2 to 5% drop is somewhat normal if you come in with a bad report for your investors. Maybe you miss some projected targets or something, but to see such a massive drop like that on your chart is a complete disaster, and there's a high possibility that it's only going to get worse from here. I think we can all agree that 2024 was not the best year for EA. They had a couple of smaller games like Tales of Kenzera Zhao that came out to basically no players, and their studio got hit with massive layoffs as a result. Two of their flagship games ended up underperforming pretty significantly, and because of that, we're starting to see all the cracks in their business model get bigger and bigger. The wildest thing about their 2024 lineup is that one of their biggest cash cows, EA Sports FC 25, was one of the best-selling games of the year, and yet somehow it's still considered to have missed the mark. It's one of the main reasons why their stock prices dropped so harshly. The bar was set ridiculously high for this game. But then again, it isn't just your regular annual soccer game that EA throws out. This is FIFA at the end of the day, under a different name because of some licensing disputes, but for the last 20 years, FIFA has been EA's golden goose, making over $20 billion from game sales and all the microtransactions. So it's basically the Call of Duty of sports games. And to see that EA Sports FC 25 underperforming is enough to have such a huge impact on the company's revenue, obviously the investors are going to start panicking. As a matter of fact, ever since they changed the name from FIFA, you can see that the search traffic for the game just dropped dramatically, which is a pretty big problem for EA since their entire business model revolves around microtransaction-heavy games like FIFA. It says on this report that more than 73% of the company's $7.56 billion revenue from 2024 was all coming from microtransactions, so to have this one title even mildly underperform is obviously a huge deal for them. I don't know, maybe the fans just didn't resonate with the new name since EA Sports FC 25 just doesn't really exactly roll off the tongue as easy, or maybe people are just finally getting tired of the same game being released every single year and having to deal with all the microtransactions of that game. But that wasn't the only massive blunder that EA had last year, because there's also Dragon Age the Veilguard, which was supposed to be the return of the king. The big comeback for BioWare after the disaster that was Anthem. Dragon Age the Veilguard was one of the most anticipated games of last year, but it was also one of the most problematic games of last year too. It's just one of those titles that got caught up in the whole woke versus anti-woke culture war that's been happening all over the gaming industry, so right off the bat, the potential player base for Dragon Age the Veilguard was basically cut in half. And to make matters worse, a lot of the people who were huge fans of the Dragon Age series and were looking forward to the latest installment were pretty disappointed with how the Veilguard was being marketed. Some characters in the game, they just really didn't resonate with them. So a lot of the fans of the Dragon Age series just skipped the Veilguard altogether, so that one also ended up underperforming by 50% as well, even though all the social media and all the game journalist website, everybody was calling this the best Dragon Age game they've ever played. But unfortunately, Dragon Age the Veilguard only managed to sell 1.5 million copies, which is a huge number, of course, don't get me wrong, but they were expecting to sell 3 million plus copies in order to be in the green. It's really surprising how these development budgets just keep ballooning like crazy, and it's wild to think that even if you make a product that reaches over 1 million people, it's still considered a commercial failure. But in contrast, when we talk about Anthem, like we mentioned, that was a very disappointing game, and even that one still managed to sell 2 million units in just the first week alone. So the fact that Dragon Age the Veilguard couldn't hit those numbers really says a lot about how the tide seems to be turning on EA. But I think it's pretty easy to look at all the surface level problems right now that EA is going through and think that that's the whole conversation. They just had a rough year, the stock price dipped a little, we'll get them next time, right? Well, not exactly. It's not enough that their biggest moneymaker and one of their most famous franchises both flopped last year. 2025 is also going to be a do or die moment for EA, because we're also going to see the release of the new Battlefield game, which is one of their main franchises as well. And if you know about the buggy and unfinished mess that people got in Battlefield 2042, then you know that there's actually a lot riding on this new Battlefield game, and being good just isn't going to cut it anymore. Especially since there's already a pretty solid competitor on the market called Delta Force that's been pulling in really decent numbers on Steam, and everybody's calling it what Battlefield should have been. So this new Battlefield game really has to blow away people's expectations, but seeing how how it's EA at the end of the day, honestly, I don't really see that happening. And do you want to know what the funniest part about all this is? Battlefield isn't even their biggest problem at the moment, because EA also has a ticking time bomb with one of their other cash cows, and the recent price drop in their stock, I don't really think it reflects how bad things are going at the moment with Apex Legends. You know, to be frank with you, the state of Apex Legends right now is an absolute disaster. The game has been bleeding players at a pretty alarming rate. I would say ever since like Season 16, Season 17, a bunch of competitive teams have pulled out entirely from going to tournaments in Apex, content creators are dropping the game like flies, and the whole casual scene is practically non-existent inside of Apex. And I'm not saying this to be a hater, you know? I used to be one of those guys that was actually very addicted to playing Apex. I played it non-stop during the early seasons. I still have my diamond dive trail back from rank Season 2, so the last thing I want to see is the game fail. But when you see Apex being so poorly mismanaged over the years, and you see that even the most die-hard of fans are abandoning it, then you know it's not just a small drop in numbers. Apex Legends is currently on a death spiral. One of the top players and best content creators for Apex made a pretty detailed video going over as to why the game has been dropping in numbers non-stop, but the whole gist of it is that Apex has been seriously neglected by the higher-ups because they were really not expecting this game to pop off as hard as it did back in 2019. Keep in mind that Apex Legends launched with basically no marketing. It just spread through wildfire on Twitch via word of mouth, and it somehow made it into the top 3 best battle royales out there even to this day. EA and Respawn literally caught lightning in a bottle with Apex Legends and made a ridiculous amount of money from it, but you know, in true EA fashion, because it is EA at the end of the day, the most important decision making that happened regarding Apex was never really about improving the game or engaging with or fostering the community. It's always about new seasons, new battle passes, new microtransactions. They're basically squeezing every last dollar they can out of the player base while the population nosedives without reinvesting it to make a better gaming experience. So what you're getting with Apex Legends is basically the same formula that you see in a lot of their live service games, where they focus so hard on short-term profits and just completely ignore the long-term sustainability of the game, which ends up making the game feel neglected. It feels repetitive. The same holiday game modes keep coming back every single year, same disregard for the voices of the players, and just optimizing the game for player engagement instead of player enjoyment. So with Apex Legends not really being appealing to the competitive scene anymore, and the casual players really having no incentive to stick around, and of course having serious competition entering the market with all the great games that are coming out recently, while you can see the community's direct response to EA and Apex Legends' decisions basically in this graph. You know, it's a nosedive. Apex Legends is a ticking time bomb that EA made a lot of money from back in the day, and to this day still makes a decent amount of money through all the microtransactions, but it feels like when that bubble finally pops, all the years of greedy moves from EA are finally gonna catch up to them, because this isn't a company that has the goodwill of the people behind it. You know, they've had a lot of opportunities and the cash flow to make something proper for themselves, you know, to develop a proper reputation in the eyes of the public, but EA has burned so many bridges over the years that the number of players who actively want to see this downfall happen just keep getting bigger and bigger. And now with some of their biggest franchises underperforming, the amount of healthy alternatives in the market for people to enjoy today, you can really see that the cracks inside of their business model are about to get even worse. Because when your entire strategy relies on short-term profits without reinvesting some of that into making quality experiences for the community, while even if you do manage to catch lightning in a bottle like how EA has done so many times in the past, it's still gonna dry out if you ignore it. And when that finally does happen, well, I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens to their stock price after that. But the way I see it right now, I think that EA is in for a rude awakening.